Hello and welcome to How to Bear Radio for January of 2023. I'm Jill of Bear Radio, and today we're going to be talking all about scripting and writing for audio. Now, scripting can be such a fun part of the podcasting process, especially if you give yourself a chance to get creative. It might take a bit of practice, but finding a script format that works for you will not only streamline your production process, but it'll help to give that extra personality to your podcast. Most podcasts that you hear have at least a little bit of scripting. Like when the hosts read advertisements, they credit their team or introduce an episode, they've probably written those things down in a script. Some hosts script their whole show, word for word, while others will just write down like the episode title and nothing else. There are some pros and cons to scripting, depending on your preferences. Scripts will help you to make sure that you get your message exactly right, often to precise timing. For example, if you know that you have 30 seconds to get out a message, it's probably a good idea to script that. It'll also help you to gather your thoughts, have your topics prepared, as well as any other information that you might need so that you can remain focused as you move through your podcast episode. The main downside to preparing a script is that precision and that accuracy can come at the cost of time and presentation quality. The downside is that they must be read, and it takes a lot of practice to get good at writing and reading a script in your voice naturally. But in the next episode of How to Bear Radio, we'll get into that. There are three main ways that people write scripts for their podcasts. The first is the word-for-word podcast script. This kind of script ensures that you cover everything you need to, especially when you're discussing more topics with jargon or specialized words or complicated topics that you might need to have references for. For those who might not be as confident behind the microphone, a word-for-word script will really help you to stay on track. But again, it's kind of hard to make it sound like you're not reading, so make sure to practice that when you have time. The second way of going about writing a script for your podcast is a detailed episode plan. So rather than a word-for-word script, a podcast plan is like an excellent way to keep your interviews and your narration on track, while ideally sounding more natural in the process. You'll have the basic information you need on the subject or interviewee, and this is a good compromise between writing a full script and doing it on the fly. The third way is a flexible podcast plan. You'll have rough bullet points for this podcast plan with a short set of section headers, and with those headers, they'll represent the themes or topics that you'll be focusing on within the episode. It gives you the opportunity to focus on your expert knowledge, and they're usually used for conversational podcasts. When do we use scripts? Well, you'll want to use a script for a few different parts of the podcasting process. And the way that you write these scripts will vary depending on if they're being used during the interview or during production, like if you're making narration. For the interview, a lot of people will simply have a list of guiding questions, but it's always a good idea to script out a soft introduction for yourself and for your guest. You'll also want to have some extra information and research at the ready just in case the interview shifts topic or your guest brings up something that you kind of have to be flexible to follow along with. A good host and interviewer will have to improvise questions based on the guest's responses. A script is also a great way to flesh out your episode once you've recorded a few interviews or ambiance or other elements that you want to include in the episode, and you need to start figuring out how to best edit them together to tell your story. But it can be a daunting task to build out a script from an hour-long interview. Luckily, there are a few steps you can take to streamline this process. Step 1. Transcribe your interview. I cannot stress enough how important it is to transcribe your interview. It will not only help you to do a deep listen to the interview itself, but pulling those clips will actually become the building blocks for your episode. Next, you'll want to isolate key themes and talking points throughout that process of reading through your transcript. So what did your interviewee or interviewees keep bringing up that maybe you weren't expecting? Or what themes can you use to build the entire episode? Next, you'll identify the actual quotes that you would like to use as hitting points in the episode. So these are things that you're like, oh, that's really good, and I want my listeners to hear that, and that really exemplifies this topic. In step 4, I know we've jumped a bit, but you'll want to then start collecting soundscapes and found footage and music that will help you to tell your story. These are really the icing on the cake for any episode. Lastly, you'll want to start storyboarding and fleshing out your episode plan. This will help you to start building out your episode timeline and seeing where those quotes, those themes, that music, and the soundscapes all fit together. In the next episode, we'll be discussing how to write narration, especially in your own unique voice, and how to use markups in your scripts. Until then, I'm Jill Baton of Bear Radio.